much of my work in Inductica is based on the premise that our modern physical theories are flawed and need to be fundamentally overhauled. However, that sort of leaves open, why is it that I think our fundamental theories need to be overhauled? And I have, the reason I think that is because I basically agree with a lot of thinkers that have come before me, such as David Harriman, who give strong arguments against modern theories and talk about their flaws. So what we're going to do today is get Henry's perspective on why these theories are wrong. And I think that there's a lot to be learned from the way Henry thinks about this. And I think this will serve to motivate us in continuing Inductica's mission, continuing to follow along with Inductica's mission, which is to fundamentally overhaul and replace these theories so that we can actually move on and make new discoveries. So thank you very much for coming on the program, Henry.
You're welcome, James. Thanks for having me.
So let's start off with the big overarching question. Tell me in broad strokes why our foundational theories, quantum mechanics, and general relativity are flawed.
Well, let me begin by giving, your listeners some background. Why should they listen to me? Who am I? Do I have a PhD in physics? No. Did I take mathematics beyond, calculus 1 and 2 in college? No. But what I am is a person who decided after having gone through a great deal of education, schooling, college, even while I was in medical school, I realized I didn't really understand how the world worked, and I wanted to do that. I wanted to figure it out. I started to think about, the world in general, and years later, I was sitting down trying to understand, the cosmos and its complexity and its evolution. And so I thought, well, where does all this stuff come from? What is everything made of? And I looked to Einstein. And what I found was the primary constituents of reality are mass energy and space-time. So what are those? I read Einstein's little book, The Special and General Theory. I had it with me. I was working in Saudi Arabia at the time. And I realized, having read Ayn Rand and her distinction between the primacy of consciousness and the primacy of existence in philosophy. You either start with the mind and you work from there with our conscious experience to build a model of the world, or you start with some idea that some external reality exists and you try to understand that. Well, I realized very quickly that Einstein's mass energy space-time consisted only of measurements made by the observer, literally, as Einstein said, with his rods and clocks. And I quickly realized that we have no theory whatsoever of what exists and is causing any of the phenomena we deal with. What is light? Why does it move at sea all the time? And for whom? What is gravity? What causes it? We have a model. We have an observer's rods and clocks model called general relativity that is just a description of what gravity is doing to our rods and clocks, our atomic clocks, and so forth, and how matter moves. So that, I then had this kind of epiphany one day, because I had studied Newton in college, and I realized that gravity could be very easily explained if Newton's inertial absolute space, the inertial frame, were itself accelerating towards Earth, radially in all directions, accelerating towards Earth at g, the gravitational acceleration at that point. And that perfectly explains the ballistic aspects of gravity. And then I had this intuition, well, what about the velocity of this flow? If we've now turned Newton's absolute space into a fluid that flows radially into a sink, what's its velocity? And a little bit of thinking and wondering and looking at the situation made me realize this flow would reach the velocity that Newton called the escape velocity, although it's flowing inwards. But it makes perfect sense if you're trying to fire a projectile away from the Earth, it needs to leave with the escape velocity so that it can overcome all the acceleration of the inflowing inertial space. And so basically, I for the first time realized there's a way to understand gravity. So why, I tried to publish it, I tried to get people interested, nothing happened. But it got me interested in the whole history of why did Einstein create a physics limited to what observers measure with their rods and clocks in their frame. Why did he create a special relativity? If you look at its 3 axioms, there is no mention of the cosmos or any cosmic frame. There's only coordinate systems. Light moves at c in every coordinate system, which is a non-physical concept. The same light moves at the same speed in coordinate systems that are moving at different velocities relative to one another.
Yeah.
It's not physical or cosmic in any way. And so that led me on a very long journey. And the reason that I'm here and can speak to you is that what I discovered are philosophical problems. And these are unknown to people who are experts in these models because they simply are their children when they get trained to do the math, to accept that the world doesn't make sense. Light just moves at c for every frame. You just have to accept it. Your career is going to be limited to finding equations that match certain things. And my, James, my daughter entered, she decided for her own reasons to study physics and was very successful and gained a great deal of knowledge. And she saw what happened to grad students, and professors told her what happened to grad students once they got into the system. The first year, they're interested, they think they're going to learn the big secrets of the cosmos, what everything is, how it works. They're going to become experts in the most fundamental questions of natural philosophy. Very quickly, they learn that no, you're not going to get any answers about anything. Here are the equations. Here's the math. It's very complex. No, we don't know what it actually refers to, but it works. And this is all you're going to do the rest of your life is get the math right. Really. And it is very demoralizing. She saw it happen.
Yeah, this is a different perspective on the very same hell I experienced. Or that might be a little dramatic, but the extreme disappointment to think that I was going to get the chance to study the fundamental nature of the universe. And I when I was in college, I was philosophical, but I wasn't philosophical enough to understand what I was seeing. It just was somehow ineffably disappointing. And this is why I couldn't name it, but this is why is what you're describing.
Yes. And so what I discovered is an immense philosophical problem at the heart of our theoretical physics. And that got me reading the history of philosophy. How did we end up here? And in essence, it was pretty, I just read my way through, Enlightenment philosophy, ancient Greek philosophy, medieval philosophy, early modern thinkers like Francis Bacon, who's really one of my favorite thinkers of all time. And I discovered what happened. I discovered why Einstein did what he did with his 2 papers. There's not only special relativity, but in 1905, he created quantum mechanics. And he did so with his paper on the light quantum, in which, he knew light is a wave. It should always be treated as a wave. But he found that, he could use, what Planck had found with blackbody radiation and what photoelectric experiments were showing. And that is that the light that was emitted and absorbed by electrons bound to atoms had this quantized character. And so he realized, hey, we can just treat light as a particle of energy that leaves the source, travels, through space and is absorbed in the photoelectric multiplier and we can just treat it as photons. Well, it works to a large extent in some ways to do that. It gives you a statistical treatment that, so many photons are made here, they're absorbed here, and so forth. And, you can do that, but it doesn't make any sense of what light is. The only way to understand, there's so many qualities of life that are that are completely incompatible with the photon model. So I looked at the philosophical background, and in a way, it's a simple detective job. Look at what Einstein said. He said that he was greatly influenced by Hume and Mach. He had read Berkeley, he had read Kant, and in essence, he was a philosopher too. His view was to impose a different philosophy on physics gained from what he had read from the people he, found to be interesting and that he admired. And so that is what he did. Now, if you look at Hume and Mach, I will come back to them very quickly, but I'll tell you they got their ideas from a thinker before them who was Bishop Barkley. And I'm not alone in finding this connection. Karl Popper wrote an article on Berkeley as a precursor of Mach and Einstein in Philosophical Conjectures, a book he wrote. And so Berkeley is very interesting and really the key to understanding all of this, because he was a bishop of the church. And what he saw was the Copernican revolution that was just 250 years before, or 200 years, and then the Newtonian revolution, which was contemporary. He saw them as a threat to religion, and in essence to spiritualism or theism as their core concepts. The idea that there's a spirit God that created everything, and we are spirits in a material body. In essence, this is still the default belief of most people. And so a physics that was compatible with that was very appealing back then and has remained so. But let me give you more detail. Most of you have seen the movie The Matrix, with Keanu Reeves. One of my favorite films, because it actually embodies Bishop Berkeley's theory of who we are and what we're experiencing and why. And it came down to this. He saw Copernicus's ideas and Newton's theory as a threat to religion. He literally attacked Newton, and this is kind of a forgotten story, as an atheist. He said Newtonian mechanics is atheism. Why? Because Newton said that space and matter follow these rules and do what they're going to do without God, without any need for God. There's no God making things happen, controlling things, and that this would lead to atheism. And indeed, Newton responded to that by adding a scholium to his Principia, in which he essentially equated his absolute space with the Spirit of God. So he found a way to kind of, reduce the conflict. But so Berkeley rejected dualism. Dualism is the idea that the world has two realities, spiritual and material. We are spirits in a material body. God is a spirit who made a material cosmos. This is dualism. And Berkeley saw that if we accept dualism, what's happening, and this was before Darwin, is that as people keep explaining how the things work in the world by materialistic so-called explanations, and that leaves less and less room for God as the cause and creator and sustainer of everything, and leads to atheism, which will lead to chaos, loss of authority and this and that. So he made a decision, which was to get rid of the cosmos, literally get rid of the cosmos as an entity. And how did he do so? Very simply. He said that there is no material cosmos, there is no matter, there's nothing but the spirit world. And you are spirits. I am a spirit, you're a spirit, and God is a spirit. And actually what he's running is a spiritual matrix in which our spirits' experiences are coordinated by God with each other's spirits' experiences. And with this matrix a spiritual world that he created. And so he studied, Berkeley said, that that's all we should do. And literally he created what is modern science with a capital S. And I'll get into that soon. But he basically created a science that had eliminated the cosmos from its core structure, and was only going to seek what God gave us, which is the experiences and measurements that we have. God is feeding these experiences to our consciousness, and we should just, measure things, find the laws that he's using to make this matrix work.
It's all just, this is consistent with the idea that like we're at the center of the universe and all these stars wheeling around are just this light show put on for our benefit, in effect.
Yes.
It's the non-natural.
Yes.
And that's what the Copernican revolution really is. It's not just literally the Earth isn't at the center. It's that we're not at the center. It's that we live in a natural universe. We are just part of a natural cosmos.
Yes. And Berkeley saw it was a threat.
Yeah.
And indeed, a kicker is coming, folks. Einstein claimed that the Copernican revolution was rendered meaningless by relativity. I'll explain exactly why he said so, why he could seriously say that. So anyway, Berkeley, studied the laws of optics because, and he was very good at it because he was trying to figure out how God created this feeling that we have that there's this three-dimensional extended space. How did God do this? Well, he used the laws of optics. So literally, God is a game programmer. Let's create. He creates this 3D world and uses all these physical rules, laws, to make us feel like we are beings in a material world. The downside of his idea is literally he says God is a deceiver. But that was okay because he got rid of what he saw as the major threat to religion, spiritualism, which was the cosmos, and understanding the cosmos, its evolution, and how it produced us. And again, this was before Darwin, but it kind of inoculated the world against the full impact of Darwin's ideas, which I can certainly explain later. So this is Berkeley. Now comes David Hume. Whom Einstein had mentioned Berkeley, but he didn't really understand him fully, as I mentioned in a paper. Actually, everything I'm talking about can be seen in papers at my website, henrylintner.net. One called The Philosophical Inadequacy of Modern Physics goes through this whole philosophical argument. So David Hume was Berkeley without the matrix theory. He said he took the epistemology, which is all that we should do is describe our sensations and measurements, but he dropped the metaphysical rationale, which is that everything is a spiritual matrix. Because very few people can really believe that, but they took the epistemology and they ran with it. And, Kant came along and said, well, there's reality, but we can't know it, so we can only know, the things presented to our senses, and we impose on that reality these categories of space and time that are actually mental categories, parts of our mentation, basically. Well, then came the most important figure before Einstein, who had the most influence on Einstein, who is Ernst Mach. Ernst Mach, once again, took the epistemology and dropped the metaphysics. So Ernst Mach is very famous. In my view, he really created what we would call modern science. He said that science should never do anything but find the laws that govern our sense experiences. He said anything beyond that was just metaphysical speculation and worthless. And that he never spoke of philosophy. He spoke only of science. He never spoke of theory. Basically, he spoke only of models that we use to describe our conscious experiences. And his view was called positivism, and it was very influential at the time Einstein was a young man. There was the Vienna group. The idea of logical positivism had become very popular in philosophy. And he said we should never think of this absolute space because we can't see it or feel it, Newton space. We should only, talk about the relative motions of things, and therefore he coined the term relativist. People who drop Newton's absolute space and will only talk about relative motions of various things are relativists. And this, it was also, his idea was also called sensationalism. It really has many forms. And so Einstein admitted that in his early years he was very strongly influenced by Mach. But he said then he realized that Mach was missing something. Because as you know, Mach denied that atoms existed. There were no atoms for Mach because we couldn't see them, feel them, touch them, pick them up. But even though you needed atoms to explain anything, in chemistry, in physics, he just said, no, there are no atoms. So he was famous for denying it because it was a theoretical construct to try to explain the observations instead of simply an observation. Einstein went beyond Mach. He said, we need some way of, we can invent these theoretical constructs that would then serve as the cause or background to explain why we're experiencing these things. And that was his only purpose, was to find these regulative connections between our sense experiences. And he looked for these freely created ideas that we could come up with that would make sense of our sense experiences, like put them into a pattern that worked. And the photon is that kind of idea. Absolute C was that kind of idea. Didn't matter if they had any physical meaning or reality whatsoever or worked to explain everything, but they worked to kind of help correlate our measurements and sensations into some sort of working system. And you can look at space-time as the ultimate example of that. Here's this four-dimensional solid that, serves to represent what all observers kind of, are observing from their different motions, perspectives, and so forth, with their rods and clocks being altered by their motion. It is basically Bishop Barkley's matrix. You can look at space-time as the matrix. God has made this space-time matrix, and it affects all our measurements and produces our experiences. So
Briefly,
Einstein,
I would say there's a difference between Berkeley saying everything is consciousness and God is putting on a light show for our benefit and we just need to figure out what the thoughts of God are. That's one view, but there's a different view of modern scientists, which I think is far less serious. It's just as flawed, but it's less serious. It's the idea that it's not even the idea. It's like the unspoken mindset that all of our concepts that we come up with to explain things, they aren't real. They aren't to be taken too seriously. They are just mental models for keeping track of the results. And I think that's so ingrained into most scientists now that they don't really entertain the alternative. They haven't asked themselves, well, which is it? Am I talking about what really is the case, or am I talking about something that just helps us remember the results of experiments?
Yes, a constant confusion. It's never resolved, and we can go into many examples of that. But so Einstein, essentially, he ended back up as a Berkeleyan, one way or another. He didn't. He kind of believed, and he was inconsistent. Let's be very clear about this, and I mentioned this in the paper. He admitted it himself. He said a physicist can be an unscrupulous philosopher. And by that, he really meant epistemologist. He said, we can resort to realism, idealism, subjectivism. We can resort to whatever we want to basically get things right. And that's where the problem lies. He was not consistent. If he were consistent in saying that he didn't believe any physical cosmos existed and therefore didn't need to be modeled or described, then everyone would have understood what he was doing, and it would have been rejected much sooner. But he made it seem as though he's trying to describe a physical world. He really did believe in a kind of independently existing physical world. But he was only going to approach it from within consciousness. Basically, still just use consciousness as our means, as our, you can call it hard physics. All it does is describe our measurements and give us the right predictions. And he believed that we would look for the determinative, rules, ideas, assumptions, freely created ideas that would help us do this, help us get a model that works. And this is why he did not accept quantum mechanics fully, because they couldn't find any underlying rules, concepts that would produce a determinative answer, a determinate result. All you could get is statistics. And that's why he would say God doesn't play dice. He would bring up in his discussions with Heisenberg and Bohr, he would and Pius, he would say, if a mouse isn't looking at the moon, does it not exist? Or does it start existing when a mouse looks at it? Because he saw quantum mechanics didn't escape solipsism. Since it doesn't postulate any kind of regulative system, it can't, to predict reliably what we're going to measure. He basically said it is solipsistic, and the Bohr-Heisenberg Copenhagen interpretation is solipsistic. It says there's just the observer, there's just these functions, wave function that helps predict what we're going to measure, and there's nothing else. As Feynman and others would put it at some point, shut up and calculate. And Einstein, said we need to look deeper. We need to find, what some rules of the matrix, literally. And nobody did, and nobody will. And the reason, again, people should listen to me is I'm explaining the philosophical problem. They will not learn about this from any experts in physics. Anybody who's gotten a PhD had any desire to understand the world hammered out of them a long time ago. Or let's put it this way. They try to understand the world, but they're stuck with models that were invented specifically to not model the cosmos or understand it. So they're in a confused state. Einstein left everybody in a confused state because he did not provide a consistent philosophical explanation for what he was doing or why. And so people they're taught these models, they assume that relativity is a theory. It isn't. It's an observer-based model of what observers are supposed to measure with their rods and clocks. They assume quantum mechanics is a theory of the physical world and how it operates. It is not. It's nowhere close. It is only a model of what observers are going to see or measure with their photoelectric multipliers, their Atlas, devices in the LHC. They are simply seeking a mathematical system that will give them the right predictions.